Tonight, in a new report, the Parliamentary Budget Officer, Kevin Page, says the government's tough on crime agenda will cost billions more than the government has been telling the public. The truth and sentencing legislation introduced last fall is the cornerstone of the Tory government's tough on crime agenda. It eliminates the 2-for-1 credit granted to criminals for time served before their sentencing. But what are the true costs of it, according to the Parliamentary Budget Officer? Here are the highlights of Kevin Page's report. I want to show these to you right now. Page predicts the new bill will nearly double the corrections spending to more than $5 billion. That's $1 billion a year by the fiscal year 2015-2016. On top of that, Mr. Page predicts 13 new prison facilities will have to be built to deal with nearly 4,000 more inmates, 3,754 to be exact. They'd also spend more time behind bars. On average, in 2008, inmates spent 563 days in prison. The new Truth in Sentencing bill will see that go up to 722 days in just under 2 years. For a look at the report, I'm joined now by the Parliamentary Budget Officer, Kevin Page. Mr. Page, good to see you.
Good to be here.
There's a lot in this, so
yes.
I just said, when we've given our audience some of the basic outlines, but the first thing we should kind of outline is how your numbers differ from what the public has heard from the government. You're saying $1 billion over a year for 5 years as a result of this Truth in Sentencing Act. The government is saying $2 billion, that's it. So there's a $3 billion discrepancy. How do you explain that?
Well, again, what you have in your hand, Evan, is the PBO report. And, it's 100-plus pages, 2 different models, explaining assumptions, providing our analysis behind the numbers. And we're saying roughly $1 billion a year each year for 5 years, split between operations and maintenance because of additional headcount, something in the neighborhood of, 600, 650 million, and additional costs for new construction. So $1 billion every year. Now, on the government side, we haven't seen any paper. There's no methodology, so we can't compare our methodology with their methodology. And there's been, effectively nothing in the report on plans and priorities tabled by the government in the spring, and nothing in the budget. So it's very hard for us to do a comparison of, different assumptions. What's the reason between $5 billion and $2 billion?
Now, I have in my hand, this is the budget 2010. This is a pretty thick document. There is nothing in here that I can find that points out that the government will spend almost, according to your numbers, $1 billion a year over 5 years. That's a pretty fat line item. Would one expect the government to have talked about this in the budget?
Yes, and I think Parliament should have been briefed on it. We said today that $1 billion a year is significant. In the current fiscal times, and just the overall size of program spending in Canada, $1 billion is a lot of money. We raised concerns about whether or not there's, that what's been set aside in the fiscal framework, because there's been a lack of disclosure. We've raised concerns today about just a lack of transparency while the debate was taking place on the Bill C-25, because whether you're talking about amount of money of, originally the government said 90 million, then they said 2 billion, or we're saying $1 billion a year. There's a big difference, for parliamentarians. They need to discuss, trade-offs and priorities and policy directions, and those are material differences. And we've also said, today through the report that there's going to be a big operational cost impact on the provinces and territories as a result of the change to the criminal code, which affects both jurisdictions.
And I want to get into that because, as you say, the provinces are going to have to pick up a big tab here as well. But let me just get at that other issue, which is this access to information issue, because it seems very crucial here. Your report, the Parliamentary Budget Officer, comes out with this $5 billion, and there's other key issues: 13 new prisons, 3,700 more new inmates. But this report took you a long time,
yes.
Raising the question, why did it take you so long? Were you having trouble getting information about this stuff?
Well, I mean, there are a number of challenges when you do a major policy costings, and this isn't the first major policy costing we've done. Our first report is on the Afghanistan engagement, then we did a policy costing on Aboriginal educational infrastructure. But when you do this, you need to have access to experts in the area, and we didn't have much access, certainly no direct contact with Correctional Services Canada. We relied basically on the information that was provided in public documents, and that was it. But we did build a really strong peer review panel, experts at the provincial level, at the federal level, experts in facility management, model building people that, professors at universities like McGill and Carleton to help us with this study.
But when you said you didn't have access to Correctional Services Canada, CSC, were you supposed to have access to that information from them, or was that just give us
Yes.
the politics here? I mean, I'm trying to get at, and I know you got to be careful here, Mr. Page, but as the parliamentary budget officer, should you be given access to the key numbers so you can actually make a report that Canadians trust is accurate?
Well, my job description is legislate in the Act of Parliament, so it tells me what I'm supposed to do, and also provides a provision to get access, free and timely access to information. But when we did our costings on the other big policy issues, we at least had an opportunity to sit down with public sector officials, in Department of National Defense or in Indian Northern Affairs, and they explained their information. We didn't get that access here, but it is complicated, and there is limited amounts of data. You have to make some very important assumptions. So in our report, which is 100+ pages, we document, here's the key assumptions behind our estimates. Here's some of the behavioral issues that you need to be mindful of.
But you say you didn't get access. I just want to put a finer point on that. Did you get stonewalled? When you asked for information, was that information?
Well, more than a half a dozen times we had meetings set up that were canceled, with officials at Correctional Services Canada. Now, but going forward, now that we've done this report and we use taxpayer dollars, we spent months building the models, and we built a model looking forward, and we built a model kind of just looking at what if this act was in place in 2007 and 8, and we provide a lot of transparency. We're prepared to sit down with these officials because there's other crime bills at stake. Mr. Holland is interested in some of the costs of some of these other crime bills. Work with Correctional Services Canada, work with the provinces to kind of make full use of some of the work that we've done so far.
But Vic Taves, the Minister of Public Safety, we're speaking to him. They stand by their $2 billion figure. I guess the question is, how do they...
Well, what's behind the $2 billion figure? I mean, we built, models, and you have a significant report in front of you. That's what's behind our numbers. But again, we don't have any paper or any methodology behind the government's numbers, and so which raises concerns about transparency, both what's in the fiscal framework, are we covered up the cost pressure, and just the fact that this act is now in force, and we've had no real disclosure on their numbers.
All right, now quickly, the cost sharing, because the feds have to pay for this almost $5 billion over 5 years, as you calculated. The provinces will have to pay for more. You got 3,700 new inmates
at the federal level.
At the federal level, how do the provinces? Are the feds going to help the provinces pay for the cost of their new legislation? How does it work?
Well, unlike the healthcare system, or we have a Canada Health Transfer, Canada Social Transfer, we have a large equalization program. We have no fiscal transfer program to deal with this issue with the provinces, so they're left with the bill, so to speak.
One last question here. I've talked to Minister Taves. There is something in the Correctional Services Canada called double bunking, which is you put more than one inmate in a cell that's designed essentially for one person. Now, it's a very controversial policy. Minister Taves says that he's fine with double bunking. If there wasn't double bunking, as most prisons were originally constructed, how many new prisons would we need to build? I mean, obviously, double bunking is a cost-saving measure, but are your numbers based on the double bunking or the single bunking?
Well, we have information provided to us from Correctional Service Canada on what the occupancy ratios are. So we know from medium, for low, medium, high, and multi, what do those, occupancy ratios look like? And on average, it's about 90% at the federal level. So, and we're talking, and we have roughly 13,000 heads or bodies in these on an average daily basis. We're talking about adding another 4,000 people to the system on an average daily basis once this act is fully enforced. So that's going to push the occupancy ratios well above 100%. Now, if the government doesn't want to build any additional facilities, that's an operational decision. But what we've costed on a report, Evan, is that even the operations and maintenance costs dealing with these extra head counts is going to add more than $600 million a year over and above what the government's had in the framework.
Final question. We've talked a lot about the so-called structural deficit that you argue that this government is in. What is the fiscal impact of this kind of legislation if this goes through? Do other cuts have to come to pay for what you're saying will be the $1 billion a year to pay for this truth in sentencing?
Well, I think that your question underscores how important transparency is in the fiscal frame. What is in the budget? What did they set aside? Did they set aside $2 billion over 5 years? I mean, we heard that from Minister Taves, but that's, in a press conference, there's been no paper. We can't find anything in the budget what's in the fiscal framework. If they, if they haven't set aside $2 billion, then, the cost pressure could be quite significant.
Kevin Page, today, your report on the Truth in Sentencing Act for Correctional Services Canada. I thank you for that. Thanks so much.